Yeah, I think I said this before. I'll say it again. I think the demographic that Alex is bringing to the sport of tennis is so great, and I think all
Something
of the
about Alex Eala has become increasingly difficult for opponents to solve, and Coco Gauff may have experienced that problem more closely than almost anyone else. The American superstar has now shared the court with Eala on multiple occasions, and their encounters have offered a fascinating look at why the young Filipina has become one of the most unpredictable players on the WTA Tour. From the outside, Alex's game can look aggressive and straightforward, but once the match begins, there is something much more complicated happening. Her rhythm changes, her shot selection shifts, and her willingness to take risks can completely alter the pattern of a match. That unpredictability may be one of the biggest reasons opponents are finding it increasingly difficult to figure her out. The story became especially interesting after Eala's breakthrough performances against elite competition. Earlier in the year, she faced Gauff in Dubai, where the American produced a dominant 6-0, 6-2 victory. But the result did not erase the intrigue surrounding Eala. Instead, it became another chapter in a rapidly developing rivalry. Gauff herself had to deal with an extremely passionate crowd that was heavily behind Eala, and she later joked that she imagined the fans were actually cheering for her. She even praised the atmosphere and acknowledged that Eala was bringing a new demographic of fans to women's tennis. Then came another meeting at Indian Wells, and the story changed dramatically. Eala came out with a completely different level of confidence and immediately put pressure on Gauff. The Filipina won the opening set 6-2 and moved ahead 2-0 in the second before Gauff was forced to retire with a left arm injury. Official WTA coverage confirmed that Eala advanced to the fourth round after Gauff was unable to continue. That result showed something important. Eala was capable of producing a completely different tactical and emotional performance against the same opponent. And that is where the question surrounding Alex becomes so fascinating. What exactly makes her so difficult to read? The answer may not be one particular shot. It may be the fact that there is no single version of Alex Eala. She can attack from the baseline, change direction quickly, step forward, use different heights and speeds, and suddenly turn a defensive exchange into an attacking opportunity. When she finds her rhythm, opponents can feel as though they are constantly being asked a new question. Tennis players spend enormous amounts of time studying their opponents. Coaches analyze tendencies, service patterns, favorite directions, return positions, movement, and weaknesses. At the highest level, preparation can become almost scientific. But preparation becomes much harder when the player across the net refuses to give you the same picture for very long. That is where Eala's versatility becomes dangerous. One moment, she can patiently build a rally. The next, she can accelerate the ball and attack a short opening. If an opponent starts expecting another powerful shot, she can change the pace. If the opponent moves forward, she can look for the passing shot. If the opponent tries to overpower her, Eala has shown that she is willing to absorb the pace and wait for another opportunity. That unpredictability is especially valuable against elite opponents because the margins are so small. A player does not need to dominate every rally to win a point. Sometimes, all it takes is one unexpected change of direction or one shot that arrives at a different height or speed than anticipated. The opponent hesitates for a fraction of a second, and suddenly the entire point changes. Coco Gauff knows how important those tiny moments can be. Gauff is one of the strongest movers and returners in women's tennis, and she has repeatedly demonstrated an ability to turn defense into offense. Yet her matches against Eala have shown that the Filipina can create uncomfortable situations even against one of the sport's most accomplished young stars. The Dubai meeting was one-sided in Gauff's favor, but the Indian Wells encounter demonstrated how quickly Eala could change the dynamic. That is perhaps the biggest lesson from their rivalry. You cannot judge Eala simply by looking at one match. One day, an opponent may completely control her. Another day, Eala can walk onto the court with a different plan and suddenly make the same opponent uncomfortable. That is what makes her development so fascinating. There is also a mental element to her game that deserves attention. Eala has developed a reputation for continuing to fight even when a match begins moving away from her. She does not always need to play perfect tennis to remain dangerous. As long as she can stay close enough to the opponent, one momentum shift can bring her back into the contest. That characteristic becomes even more important when she faces top players. Against the lower-ranked opponent, a bad stretch can sometimes be recovered from easily. Against someone like Gauff, one poor service game can completely change a set. Yet Eala's willingness to keep searching for solutions gives her another chance to disrupt the opponent's rhythm. And perhaps that is the secret nobody can easily read. It isn't simply what Alex is doing. It is what she might do next. Opponents can prepare for her forehand. They can prepare for her serve. They can prepare for her movement. But preparing for a player who is willing to change her approach during the match is an entirely different challenge. The most dangerous moment may come when an opponent believes they have finally figured her out. That is when Eala can change the pattern. Instead of continuing to play the same rally, she can introduce something different. Instead of forcing the issue, she can become patient. Instead of waiting, she can attack. This ability to adjust is one of the characteristics that separates promising players from genuine threats. Talent can win points, but adaptability can win matches. And Eala's growth has happened while she has been carrying an enormous amount of attention. Her Filipino supporters have followed her around tournaments, creating an atmosphere that has surprised even established players. Gauff experienced that directly in Dubai, where the crowd heavily supported Eala. Rather than criticizing the fans, Gauff acknowledged the energy and even credited Eala with bringing new people into the sport. That reaction from Gauff is significant because it shows that Eala's influence is becoming visible beyond the Philippines. She is not simply another young player trying to climb the rankings. She is beginning to attract a passionate audience that can change the atmosphere inside a stadium. But there is another side to that popularity. The louder the crowd becomes, the greater the expectations become. Every victory creates another wave of excitement. Every defeat creates another wave of debate. Eala now has to learn how to separate the noise around her from the task in front of her. That may be one of the biggest challenges of her next stage of development. Because when the umpire calls for silence, the flags disappear into the background. The chants stop. The cameras become irrelevant. There is only the ball, the opponent, the next point, and the decisions Eala makes under pressure. That is where her real ability to confuse opponents will be tested. Can she maintain her variety when she is nervous? Can she continue changing direction when the opponent is attacking? Can she resist the temptation to force a winner too early? Can she remain patient when the crowd expects something spectacular? Those questions will determine whether her unpredictability becomes a permanent weapon or simply an exciting feature of her early career. The encouraging part is that Eala has already shown that she can learn from difficult experiences. Her defeat against Gauff in Dubai was followed by a completely different performance when they met at Indian Wells. The circumstances were different, of course, and Gauff's retirement meant the Indian Wells match cannot be treated as a conventional completed victory. But Eala's level before the retirement was impossible to ignore. She had established a significant advantage against a player ranked among the world's best. That contrast tells us something about Eala's potential. She doesn't have to become a completely different player to compete with the best. She needs to continue developing the parts of her game that allow her to make adjustments under pressure. And this is where Coco Gauff's experience becomes so relevant. Gauff has already spent years competing against the world's best. She knows how quickly opponents can evolve, how important preparation is, and how difficult it becomes when a young player begins gaining confidence. Eala is entering that stage now. She is no longer an unknown quantity. Opponents know her name. They know she can challenge top players. They know she has a passionate fan base. They know she is capable of changing the momentum of a match. And once opponents start preparing specifically for you, everything becomes harder. The advantage of surprise disappears. But another advantage can take its place: belief. When a player realizes that she belongs on the same court as the biggest names in the sport, the way she approaches difficult moments can change completely. That may be what we are beginning to see with Eala. The most exciting part of her development isn't necessarily one particular victory. It is the possibility that she is learning how to make elite opponents uncomfortable in different ways. One match may be won with power. Another may be won through patience. Another may depend on movement. Another may come down to mental toughness. If Eala continues developing all of those dimensions, then opponents will have an increasingly difficult time preparing for her. And that brings us back to the headline that has captured so much attention: why can nobody seem to read Alex Eala? Perhaps the answer is simpler than people think. Because Alex is still writing the book herself. She is still discovering exactly what kind of player she can become. She is still adding tools to her game. She is still learning which risks are worth taking and when patience is more powerful than aggression. And every time she adds another dimension, opponents have one more problem to solve. Coco Gauff has already experienced both sides of that equation. She knows what it feels like to completely control an Eala performance, but she has also experienced how quickly the matchup can change. Their meetings have produced dramatically different circumstances, and that unpredictability is precisely what makes their rivalry worth watching. For Alex Eala, the goal now is not simply to surprise the tennis world once. It is to make unpredictability part of her identity. Because once opponents know that every rally can change direction, every tactical assumption becomes less certain. And that is when a young player stops being merely promising. That is when she becomes dangerous. Alex Eala still has plenty to improve. She will have difficult losses. She will encounter opponents who expose weaknesses in her game. There will be days when nothing works. But those moments may ultimately be part of what makes her so difficult to predict. She is learning. She is adapting. And she is becoming more comfortable against players who once seemed almost untouchable. Gauff's experiences against her provide a fascinating window into that evolution. The American has beaten Eala convincingly, but Eala has also produced a performance that put Gauff under enormous pressure before injury ended their Indian Wells encounter. That contrast is exactly why nobody should assume they already know what Eala will look like the next time she steps onto the court. Maybe that is the real secret. Alex Eala isn't impossible to read because she has no weaknesses. She is difficult to read because she is becoming increasingly willing and capable of changing the story of a point, a game, or even an entire match. And if that evolution continues, the biggest names in women's tennis may soon discover that preparing for Alex Eala is no longer about stopping one weapon. It is about trying to predict what she will become next. That is a much harder problem to solve.